Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at some pretty mind-blowing Sufi concepts. You sent us these excerpts from Osho's book, The Secret, and I am so ready to dig into these teachings with you to kind of set the stage a little bit. These are talks that Osho gave back in 1978. He's speaking to his disciples, using these incredible Sufi stories and teachings to kind of highlight his own spiritual points.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is how Osho himself was a controversial figure, and he brings that lens to Sufism, and it's a tradition that's already so steeped in mystery, so it's adding a whole other layer of interpretation.
It's like peering through multiple lenses to try to get a clearer picture.
Yeah.
But before we kind of get lost in these stories, maybe we should start with a really fundamental question. How would you describe Sufism? To someone who maybe has heard the term but doesn't really grasp its essence?
Well, Osho uses this really beautiful phrase. He describes Sufism as the bridge between Fana and Baka. And you might be thinking, okay, what does that even mean? So think of it like this. Fana is like hitting the reset button on your ego. It's dissolving that sense of a separate self that we so often cling to.
I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah.
Having moments where that sense of self dissolves, like when you're really lost in a creative project.
Yeah.
Or you're completely absorbed in nature. It's like you disappear in a way.
Exactly. And then Baka is what emerges when that ego fades away. It's the experience of unity, oneness, merging with something much greater than ourselves. You could say experiencing the divine directly.
So it's not about worshiping a distant God out there somewhere, but about realizing that we're already a part of that divine reality.
That's the core of it. And the Sufis have this very powerful saying, La ilaha illallah, which means there is no God but God. And it's not negating the existence of a higher power, but rather emphasizing that everything is unified in this divine essence.
So from that perspective, everything becomes sacred.
Precisely. And that leads us to the Sufi concept of Ishq, which is often translated as passionate love for God. But it's not the kind of love you see in romantic movies. It's a much deeper, more all-consuming love that arises from recognizing our inherent connection to the divine.
Yeah, it's that feeling of being completely drawn to something, that yearning for unity that you can't quite explain, but you can't ignore. It's really powerful.
It's a love that guides you, pushes you to break free from the limitations of the ego and move towards that state of Baka that we were just talking about. It's about surrendering to something bigger than yourself.
And this is where the role of the master comes in, right? Osho really emphasizes the guidance that a master provides on this path.
Absolutely. And he tells this really intriguing story about Bahodin, who is a Sufi master. And he has this potential disciple come to him with a really burning question. Now, you'd expect some profound explanation from this wise sage, but instead, Bahodin just serves the disciple dinner.
Wait, so he just completely sidesteps the question? That's a little odd.
That's the beauty of it. The lesson goes beyond words. It's about surrendering your expectations, trusting the master's methods even when they seem completely unconventional, illogical even. Sometimes the greatest teachings come in the most unexpected forms.
I like how Osho even connects this to his own experience designing the chair for his Sufi lectures. It's like he's saying that even these mundane things can hold profound meaning if we approach them with the right mindset.
Right. What's really fascinating is how he uses these personal anecdotes to highlight the importance of trust and surrender in this spiritual path. He's not just relaying ancient stories, he's connecting them to his own experiences, his own challenges, making them really relatable and relevant.
It's like he's saying, look, even I had to go through this process of surrendering to something beyond my understanding.
Exactly. And this idea of surrender leads us to another core concept in Sufism, dying before you die. And before you get any morbid ideas, remember, we're talking about a metaphorical death here.
All right, not physically dying, but letting go of something within ourselves. It's like that story Osho tells about the man who was trying so desperately to outrun his shadow. No matter how fast he ran, it was always there with him. But then he just stops, laughs, and surrenders.
It's a beautiful illustration of how we create so much unnecessary suffering by resisting what is. So that's surrender, that dying before you die. It's about consciously letting go of the ego, the separate self, so that true being, that Baka, can emerge.
It's like embracing a kind of death
Yeah.
to experience a deeper, more authentic life. It's a powerful concept, and I think it's something that we're going to need to unpack a little bit further.
I agree. There's so much depth to this idea of dying before you die, letting go of the things that we cling to, our beliefs, identities, fears, so we can experience true freedom and unity.
But before we dive into that, I think there's another really key aspect of Sufism that we need to address. What about the knowledge? Is accumulating knowledge important on this path?
Well, Osho has a very interesting take on this. He criticizes the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. He compares people who gather information from various teachers without really understanding it to donkeys carrying cabbages.
Okay, that's a pretty vivid image, so it's not about stuffing our minds with facts and figures.
Exactly. He's making a distinction between knowledge and wisdom. You can have a head full of information, but lack the experiential understanding that transforms you from within. Sufism is about going beyond the intellect, beyond the limitations of the mind, to experience the divine directly through love and surrender.
It makes me think of that story Osho tells about the man who approaches Bahoden, boasting about all the spiritual paths he's studied. But instead of praising him, Bahoden gives him this really menial task to complete. It's like he's saying true progress isn't about how much you know, but about how much you've transformed internally.
Absolutely. It's a brilliant example of how Sufism really emphasizes inner transformation over intellectual accumulation. It's about shedding the ego's need for recognition, embracing humility.
So it seems like the ego plays a pretty significant role in this whole journey. Osho doesn't hold back in describing its pitfalls.
No, he doesn't. He warns against the ego's tendency to seek this false sense of self through identifying with thoughts, beliefs, opinions. And he shares this rather humorous anecdote about an old man who claims that his meditations are very beneficial. Despite showing no signs of inner growth whatsoever, it really highlights how easily we can deceive ourselves.
That's so relatable. It's like we get caught in this trap of seeking external validation. We think we're making progress because we're doing all the right things, but deep down, nothing's really changed.
Precisely. The ego thrives on that external validation. But true growth comes from looking inward, questioning our motives, honestly assessing our inner landscape.
So if we're not supposed to get caught up in knowledge or let our ego dictate our actions, where do we go from here? What is the path?
That's where trust and surrender come in. Osho really highlights the importance of trusting your inner intelligence and surrendering to the guidance of a master, even when it challenges your current understanding. He shares a story about a disciple who questions Hafez's teaching about staining the prayer carpet with wine. Seemed completely illogical, even blasphemous. But the point was to go beyond the literal interpretation and trust the deeper wisdom behind the instruction.
Yeah, that one really highlights the difference between intellectual understanding and experiential knowing. It's about moving beyond intellectual curiosity to a much deeper level of trust and surrender.
Exactly. It's about allowing the master to guide you beyond the confines of your own limited understanding. Even if it seems confusing or contradictory initially, taking that leap of faith.
It sounds like a pretty radical path, one that challenges a lot of our preconceived notions about spirituality. It really makes you question everything.
It does. It's about stripping away the layers of conditioning, societal expectations, to uncover the truth that lies within them.
So this is where it gets really interesting for you listening. It's an invitation to question, to explore, and potentially uncover a deeper level of truth within yourself. Are you ready to keep going?
Absolutely. There's so much more to uncover.
Mm.
One thing that might surprise you about Osho is how he directly addresses the fact that he calls himself God. It's definitely a bold statement, and it can be challenging for some people.
Yeah, I have to admit, that was one of the things that really jumped out at me. When I was going through these excerpts, it seems like he's using the term God in a very different way than we're used to hearing.
Absolutely. He's not talking about a deity sitting on a throne somewhere, judging our every move. When Osho says God, he's pointing to that ultimate reality, that ground of being that exists within us and all around us. It's about recognizing that inherent divinity that's present in everything, including ourselves.
Right. That makes a lot more sense in the context of Sufism, where the goal is to realize that oneness with the divine.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that God isn't separate from us, but rather the very essence of our being. And he uses this really beautiful metaphor of a dewdrop dissolving into the ocean to illustrate this point. So imagine that dewdrop is you, with all your unique qualities and experiences, and the ocean represents that vast, infinite, divine reality. And through that process of surrender and love, the dewdrop merges with the ocean, becoming one with the infinite.
I love that metaphor. It really captures that feeling of dissolving boundaries and limitations.
Yeah.
And experiencing a deeper connection with something so much greater than ourselves.
Yeah. And another thing that really stands out about Osho's approach to Sufism is his emphasis on experience over belief. He talks about how true religion is not about blindly following doctrines or dogmas, but about directly experiencing the truth for yourself.
He even uses that phrase, donkeys carrying cabbages, to describe those who accumulate knowledge without truly understanding it or integrating it into their lives. It's like having a library full of books but never actually opening one to read.
Right. It's that difference between intellectual knowledge and experiential knowing. It's one thing to read about the taste of an apple, but it's a whole other level of understanding to actually bite into one and experience its flavor firsthand.
Yeah, it makes me think of that saying, the map is not the territory. You can study maps and learn all the geographical details, but until you actually set foot on the land, you won't truly know what it's like to be there.
Exactly. Osho's really pushing us to go beyond these mental concepts and to actually experience the reality of the divine for ourselves. He talks about how true religion is not about seeking something outside of ourselves, but about discovering the truth that already exists within.
It reminds me of that story he shares about the man who spends 40 years searching for a guru, traveling to distant lands, studying various teachings, only to end up back in his own village, realizing that the truth had been right there in front of him the whole time.
Yeah, it's a classic tale of how we often complicate things, searching for something extraordinary. When the truth is often found in the ordinary, the everyday moments of our lives, it's about shifting our perspective and seeing the divine in the mundane.
It's a really powerful insight. It makes me wonder if we're sometimes conditioned to overlook the truth because we're so focused on finding something more complex or elaborate. Osho even talks about how society conditions us to be unintelligent, to rely on these external authorities instead of trusting our own inner knowing.
Yeah, he especially points to the education system, how it often encourages us to memorize facts and figures and regurgitate information instead of actually fostering critical thinking and independent inquiry. He argues that this system really creates a dependence on external sources of knowledge, rather than encouraging us to tap into that wisdom that already exists within us.
It's like we're taught to be followers instead of leaders, to accept what we're told without questioning or exploring for ourselves. And this connects to his emphasis on the importance of rebellion. Not necessarily against any specific authority, but against the limitations and conditioning that we've internalized from society.
Right. Breaking free from that mental prison we've created for ourselves and reclaiming that freedom and intelligence, that is our birthright.
So if we're not supposed to blindly follow these external authorities, how do we actually break free from that conditioning and awaken to that inner knowing? Are there specific practices or tools that can help us along the way?
Osho suggests a few key practices, including meditation and self-love. He talks about how meditation can help us become more aware of our thoughts and patterns, allowing us to see through those illusions of the ego and connect with that deeper truth of our being.
It's like creating space between ourselves and our thoughts so that we can observe them more objectively without getting swept away by their stories and dramas.
Exactly. And when it comes to self-love, he emphasizes that it's not about narcissism or egotism, but about appreciating and celebrating that unique being that you are, recognizing your inherent worthiness, and nurturing your own potential without seeking validation from external sources.
Right, it's about being kind to yourself, acknowledging your strengths and weaknesses, and accepting yourself fully without judgment.
Right. And this kind of leads us to Osho's critiques of society and how it often promotes mediocrity and discourages individuality. He talks about how many societal structures reward conformity and punish those who dare to be different.
Yeah, it's like we're expected to fit into these predefined boxes, to follow these prescribed paths to success and happiness, even if those paths don't really align with our true passions or values.
Right. And he specifically calls out the pursuit of money and power as these empty goals that ultimately don't lead to true fulfillment. He contrasts those materialistic pursuits with the Sufi concept of Fana, which means inner poverty. And it's not about material lack, but about recognizing that true wealth comes from within.
So it's about detaching from the ego's need for external validation and finding contentment in the simplicity of being. Recognizing that true happiness isn't found in acquiring more, but in appreciating what we already have.
Exactly. And Osho suggests that this inner poverty, this detachment from material possessions and external validation, is the foundation for true freedom and happiness. It allows us to experience a much deeper sense of connection with ourselves, with others, and with the divine.
This is really making me question some of the values that I've internalized from society. It's like we're often chasing after things that we think will bring us happiness, but they end up leaving us feeling empty and unfulfilled.
Yeah, it's a powerful challenge to our conventional ways of thinking. Osho's urging us to reevaluate our priorities and consider what truly matters in life. And it seems like a big part of that reevaluation involves questioning the role of religion itself. Osho doesn't shy away from criticizing how religions can become distorted and used to control people rather than liberate them.
Right, he specifically points to those religions that promote fear and guilt as a means of control. He argues that true religion is about love, joy, celebration, not about punishment or repression.
Yeah, he's really advocating for a more authentic spirituality, one that connects us to the divine within and allows us to experience the beauty and wonder of existence without the constraints of dogma or fear. It's about reclaiming the essence of spirituality, which is about love, compassion, and connection.
This is all so much to take in, but it's also incredibly inspiring. It's like a whole new way of looking at the world and my place in it.
It is. It's a powerful invitation to awaken to that truth that lies within and to live a life of authenticity, joy, and purpose.
It makes me wonder how we can actually bring these Sufi principles into our everyday lives. How do we make this path more than just a philosophical concept, but an embodied reality? You know, it feels like we've been talking about some pretty big concepts here, but how do we actually bridge that gap between these grand ideas and our everyday lives? How do we make this Sufi path practical and real?
Well, that's the beauty of Sufism. You know, it's not about living in some secluded monastery or adhering to a rigid set of rules. It's about bringing that awareness, that love, that surrender into every moment, every interaction, seeing the divine in the everyday, the ordinary.
So it's about kind of shifting our perspective, seeing the world with fresh eyes, finding the extraordinary in the seemingly mundane, like finding joy in a simple cup of tea, or appreciating the beauty of a sunrise.
Exactly. Osho talks about how true religion consists of recognizing the divine in the obvious, the here now, appreciating the beauty of a sunset, the warmth of a hug, the sound of laughter, being present, fully engaged in the tapestry of life, rather than constantly chasing after something more.
It's about letting go of that need to control and allowing ourselves to be guided by a deeper wisdom, trusting that this moment as it is perfect.
It's about recognizing that interconnectedness of all things. You know, Osho often talks about how we're all part of this cosmic dance, this divine play, and it's not just about our individual journey, it's about recognizing our place in this larger web of existence.
And with that recognition comes a deeper sense of responsibility, right? If we're all connected, then our actions have an impact that ripples outwards, affecting others in the world around us.
Absolutely. It's about cultivating compassion, understanding for all beings, recognizing that divine spark within everyone, even those who may seem different from us, or hold opposing viewpoints.
That's a beautiful message. It's about recognizing that unity that underlies all the apparent diversity in the world. But how do we actually live this out in our daily lives? You know, with all the demands and distractions of modern life, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and lose sight of that interconnectedness.
It is a practice, a continual process of reminding ourselves of this truth. And it doesn't have to be complicated, you know. Osho emphasizes that finding your purpose doesn't require some grand mission or heroic act. It can be as simple as being fully present in each moment, expressing your unique gifts, sharing your love with the world.
So it's not necessarily about changing the world, but about changing ourselves. And through that transformation, contributing to a more loving and a compassionate world.
Exactly. It's about embracing the challenges, uncertainties of life as opportunities for growth and transformation. Seeing obstacles as stepping stones, not roadblocks.
It's about trusting the journey, even when it's difficult or confusing, knowing that there's a deeper wisdom guiding us, even when we can't see it clearly.
This has been such a rich and thought-provoking deep dive. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of Sufism and its potential to transform not just our individual lives, but the world around us.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. And, you know, just remember, it's not about trying to become a Sufi or adhering to some rigid set of beliefs. It's about taking these principles and making them your own. Find what resonates with you and integrate it into your own unique path.
It's about becoming more aware, more loving, more trusting, more surrendered to the flow of life. And it all starts with taking that first step, that first act of awareness, that first moment of surrender.
Beautifully said. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Where will your journey take you? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of Sufism. Until next time, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep loving.
Did you get any of that?